Story 1, Ohio, USA. Now, I have to be honest with you, we covered a story from Ohio in the last volume. A man, a blowtorch, spider webs, a house fire, the spiders won. And I thought that was it. I thought Ohio had given us its contribution to this series and we could move on. Ohio was not done. Because here, in what I can only describe as Ohio doing Ohio things, we have another man, another spider web situation, and another decision that did not go well. This time, the tool of choice was not a blowtorch. This time, our man chose a torch, a handheld flame torch, the kind you use to, I don't know, caramelize a creme brulee or sear a steak or perform controlled burning in a contained environment with proper safety measures. He was not caramelizing anything. He was burning spider webs off his property. Same mission as the previous Ohio gentleman, different tool, same energy, same outcome. The property caught fire. The man did not make it. I don't know what is happening in Ohio. I genuinely do not know what is in the water there that makes men look at a spider web and think, fire, that's the answer. Fire will solve this. I am not from Ohio. I have spider webs in my home. I use a broom. I am going to continue using a broom until I die, and specifically not in the fire I started myself. But here's what gets me about this one. This is now the second Ohio spider web fire fatality we have covered. Second, which means there are at least 2 families in Ohio who, when asked how their loved one passed, have to say, spider web fire. Not war, not illness, not even a particularly dramatic accident. Spider web fire. The Darwin Award for this one came with a note that I imagine just says, Ohio, please, please. And somewhere in a corner of a porch in Ohio, a spider is building a new web, confident, unbothered, knowing history is on its side. Okay. This next one. James, a geologist, which means James has a science degree. James understands the physical world. James has studied rocks and soil and the fundamental properties of matter for years. James had a wasp problem, specifically a wasp nest. And James, being a scientist, being a man of empirical thinking and methodical problem solving, decided he was going to spray insecticide into the wasp nest. Which, fine, that's the correct instinct. Insecticide, wasp nest, logical. The delivery mechanism is where James and I part ways. James used a vacuum cleaner. He reversed the airflow on his vacuum cleaner, so instead of sucking air in, it was blowing air out, and he used it to spray the insecticide into the nest. Now, I want to pause here and give James some credit, because that is actually clever. That is lateral thinking. That is a scientist looking at available tools and improvising. I respect the ingenuity. I genuinely do. In a different context, that's the kind of creative problem solving that gets you promoted. The problem, and it is a significant problem, is that insecticide is flammable. And vacuum cleaners have motors. And motors produce heat. And heat plus flammable spray equals... The vacuum cleaner exploded. James, who studied the physical properties of matter. James, who understood chemistry. James, who had a degree that required him to learn about, among other things, what happens when you introduce a flammable substance to a heat source. James introduced a flammable substance to a heat source. In his defense, and I'm going to try to find a defense here, he was probably thinking about the wasp problem. The wasps were the immediate threat. The vacuum cleaner was the solution. The insecticide was the tool. You get fixated on the goal and you stop thinking about the steps. I have done that. I have been so focused on solving one problem that I created 3 new problems in the process. I once tried to fix a leaking pipe under my sink. I fixed the leak. I also flooded the cabinet, shorted a power strip, and somehow lost a wrench that has not been found to this day. I did not, however, cause an explosion. That's still the line. That's still where I get to feel slightly better about myself. Darwin Award, yes, with a footnote that says, flammability is not just a geology concept, James. Story 3. Mark the astronomer. A PhD and a ladder walk into an observatory. A man who has spent years studying the universe, calculating orbital mechanics, understanding the forces that govern objects moving through space. A person whose entire professional life involves precision, measurement, and attention to detail. Mark was crushed by a ladder. Not any ladder, the ladder of his own observatory, the one that was there specifically to allow access to the telescope, the one that had, presumably, safety protocols attached to it, procedures, guidelines, a clear, correct way to operate it. Mark violated the safety protocols, and the ladder, which does not have a PhD and does not care about orbital mechanics, responded by doing exactly what physics dictated it would do when the safety protocols were not followed. It came down on Mark. I think about this one a lot. I do, because Mark spent his career looking up, literally up, at the largest things in the universe, galaxies and nebulae and black holes, and the incomprehensible scale of existence. And he was brought down by something approximately 2 meters tall in his own building. The universe he studied so carefully did not get him. The latter did. There's a metaphor there. I'm not smart enough to fully articulate it, but it's there. Something about how we spend so much energy thinking about the big, distant things that we forget to look at what's right in front of us. Or, in this case, directly above us. The safety protocols existed for a reason, Mark. They existed because someone, at some earlier point, looked at that ladder and thought, this could hurt someone if used incorrectly. And they wrote it down. They made a sign. They had a procedure. And Mark, who understood the laws of physics governing objects moving at 70 kilometers per second through space, skipped the ladder procedure. Darwin Award? Yes, with a note that reads, the universe is not what got you, buddy. Story 4. Dr. Jack Barnes. The man who discovered something, then immediately tested it on himself. 1966. Cairns, Australia. Dr. Jack Barnes, an actual medical doctor, a researcher, a man investigating Erich syndrome, a condition caused by jellyfish stings that produces extreme pain, hypertension, a feeling of impending doom, and, in some cases, death. Now, Dr. Barnes was trying to figure out what caused this syndrome, which jellyfish was responsible. This is legitimate science. Important science, the kind of research that helps people. I'm not here to mock the mission. I'm here to discuss the methodology. Dr. Barnes believed he had identified the jellyfish responsible, a small jellyfish, barely a centimeter across, the Erich jellyfish, and he needed to confirm his hypothesis. So he did what any dedicated scientist would do. He let it sting him, on purpose. He picked up the jellyfish, he held it against his arm, he let it sting him to confirm that this was, in fact, the jellyfish causing Erich syndrome. Now, I want to be clear. This is not entirely unprecedented in the history of science. There's a long tradition of researchers self-experimenting. Barry Marshall drank a petri dish full of H. pylori bacteria to prove it caused stomach ulcers. He won a Nobel Prize. Self-experimentation has a track record. The difference, the key difference, is that Barry Marshall knew H. pylori probably caused ulcers and could be cured with antibiotics. He had a treatment plan. Dr. Barnes knew Erich syndrome caused, among other things, a feeling of impending doom and sometimes death, and his treatment plan was, let's see what happens. What happens was Erich syndrome, the very syndrome he was studying, which he then had, in his own body, first-hand data, you could say, extremely personal research.
He survived, actually. He confirmed his hypothesis. The jellyfish was indeed responsible. The syndrome was named after the region. Dr. Barnes contributed meaningfully to medical science. And then, and this is the part, he was nominated for a Darwin Award anyway. Not for dying, for the sheer extraordinary decision to let a potentially lethal jellyfish sting him on purpose with no clear treatment plan in front of witnesses in 1966 Australia. The Darwin Award Committee looked at this situation and said, "We don't care that you survived." The decision itself was worthy of recognition. I have to say, I respect Dr. Barnes enormously. The courage involved in that moment, holding a jellyfish, knowing what it does, pressing it to your skin anyway. That's a kind of commitment to knowledge that I absolutely do not have. I won't even try a new food without checking if it has nuts in it first. Darwin Award, with enormous respect and a note that says, "Next time, maybe find a volunteer." Story 5. Erich, non-biting Erich, the man who had one rule and one very notable exception. And finally, we arrive at today's masterpiece, Erich. Erich was a yoga instructor in Switzerland, and Erich had a nickname. The nickname was Non-Biting Erich. Which already we have questions. Already, the nickname alone raises so many things. Who gave a yoga instructor a nickname about biting? Under what circumstances was this nickname assigned? What happened in Erich's life that led to non-biting being a relevant descriptor that people felt needed to be attached to his name? I don't have answers to any of these questions. What I have is what happened next. Erich, non-biting Erich, yoga instructor, Switzerland, decided to practice yoga in the ocean, which is, unconventional, but not unreasonable. Yoga on a paddleboard is a thing. Yoga near the water is a thing. People do it. It's a vibe. The specific ocean he chose to practice yoga in contained a shark. The shark bit him on the leg. Erich, non-biting Erich, lost his leg to a shark bite while doing yoga. I need you to feel the full weight of what I just said. A man whose entire identity, whose actual nickname, whose defining characteristic as a human being was that things did not bite him, was bitten by a shark while doing yoga. The universe constructed this situation specifically. There is no other explanation. Somewhere in the fabric of reality, an irony quota needed to be filled, and Erich was the chosen vessel. Now, losing a limb is obviously a serious and devastating thing, and I want to acknowledge that. Erich survived. He lost a leg. That is genuinely terrible, and I'm not making light of the injury itself. I'm making light of the name, of the nickname, of the fact that across what I can only imagine was a lifetime of close calls with animals, dangerous situations, moments where something could have bitten Erich but didn't, the ocean said no, not today. Today, we're doing this. I think about my own nicknames, the things people associate with me, and I'm now genuinely concerned. If I have any nickname that describes a thing that doesn't happen to me, I'm retiring it immediately. Today, right now. I'm not giving the universe any ideas. Erich, I hope you healed well. I hope the prosthetic is comfortable. I hope you still do yoga on land, far from the ocean, with the new nickname. Something like non-sharked Erich. Actually, maybe not. Let's not tempt it. Darwin Award? Yes. With a note that reads, "The nickname was a challenge, Erich. The universe heard you."